Before we begin, here's how to earn continuing professional education credit for attending this session. Gain valuable insights by attending the podcast, then complete the assessment test to download your certificate. To do this, follow these simple steps. Click on the link in your description to access the session. Create a free account and attend the podcast. After the podcast, take the assessment test and download your certificate. It's easy, and it's free. We highly recommend checking out our subscription. Let's get started.
So when firms prepare for these mergers, how do they anticipate for those changes and trends that are coming? How do the firms, like both the businesses are different, both their employees are different, and now we are this merging there.
Well, actually, you see, I probably should be a little more specific there. What they tend not to do is merge their whole businesses. See, I'll give you an example.
Yes.
So from the let's do it from the accountant's point of view. I always say that accountants have two businesses under one roof.
Okay.
And you've got the backward-looking stuff, which is the compliance, and you've got the forward-looking stuff, which is the advice and advisory and planning. They are radically different businesses, like so different. And in fact, this was very much the Latham's experience, 20 odd years ago. So for example, we had, just keeping it really simple, we had two tax businesses. We had tax past and we had tax future. We did not merge them. Why is that? Well, because the way you make money in both is entirely different.
Okay.
If you're focused in tax, let's just say tax past, the only way you make more money is to be efficient, because you cannot add value to the past. I'm sorry, you may wish to think you can, but you cannot add value to the past. It has happened.
Yep.
So the only way you run that tax compliance business, you have to be really efficient. Get the job in, work on the job, get it right first time, do it right, do it to the required quality, get it out of the door, send your bill and get paid.
Welcome to another episode of We're Trying to Figure Out with Saul, where we explore the stories and insights of industry leaders who are shaping the future of business. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Paul Latham, Executive Partner at Elite Resource Team. Paul is a serial entrepreneur with a wealth of experience in the financial advisory industry, and he's here to discuss the innovative team-based model that's transforming how CPAs and financial advisors work together. Paul, thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Saul, and thank you very much for inviting me on, and welcome to all your viewers as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. Paul, can you start by giving us a brief overview of your career journey and how you became involved in the financial advisory industry?
Yeah. Okay. I'll say first of all, I'm pretty old. I'm nearly 66, so I'll try and make it quick. As you can probably tell, I'm English. So by training, I'm actually what in the UK is called a chartered accountant. It's very similar to a CPA in the US. I qualified 1983, became a partner in a firm of accountants, which eventually became Latham's Chartered Accountants. And I suppose the main part of that story is, in that period up to about 93, we were a very traditional accounting firm. We did really what I now call looking backwards, accounts, tax returns and the like. There was a report by the Institute of Accountants back in about 93. And what it really said was it predicted really the future. You referenced the future in your intro. And it basically said, if you carry on doing what you are doing, which is dealing with a commodity, accounts, tax returns and so on, then your future's pretty bleak. You're going to be working harder and harder and faster, sort of for less money, and basically you're going to be having no fun. And myself and my three other partners at the time, we sat round a table and we said, let's not do that. Let's become forward-looking accountants. planning and so on. And of course, that's a really easy and glib thing to say, but we did it. And, there's obviously a huge story behind it, but 8 years later, we'd become 80% forward looking. In terms of only 20% of our revenues were those backward looking things. And actually we sold the business in 2001 for about $45 million. We'd grown to about best part of 300 people.
Nice.
The time we decided to sell it, and again, there's a story as to why we decided to sell it. But in part, it was because myself and one of the other partners wanted to do something else. We took a business public, nothing to do with accounting. That was an interesting experience, learned a lot. It's very demanding on your personal time. So sort of excused myself, if you like, from that around about 2007, bought and sold companies. Somewhere along the line, I decided, this was about 2010, 11, I wanted a change. I moved to the US. I had absolutely no intention of working with accountants. It's been 10 years since I had. But one of the very early things I noticed, and it was sort of almost by accident, that the accounting industry in the US at that time was remarkably similar to what the UK had been in 1992 or 1993. In other words, predominantly looking backwards.
Yeah.
And that was the point when I suddenly realized, well, there's a big opportunity here to actually help accountants. In the beginning, my thought was towards accountants, was to help accountants in the US, because I'd already done that transition myself.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of this journey that we're on today. And along the way, and again, we can go into this in more detail as you wish, I met up with my now partner, Anton Anderson, and together we formed this business, and it's called Elite Resource Team. And what we do now is we help both advisors, financial advisors, and accountants to come together and work together more effectively in something we call the team-based model. So, I mean, that's a fairly quick review of my history. There's tons of, obviously, other stuff I could say, but probably that's enough for now.
Well, that's splendid. Let's dive into this origins of the team-based model. Can you walk us through the early days of developing this model? What problems were you trying to solve?
Yeah, well, myself and Anton have actually worked together probably in the last 4, 5, 6 years. So there was a period before I met Anton where I was mainly focusing on accountants, and I actually in that period developed much of the tools and systems that today form part of the team-based model. But you reference problems, and probably one of my earliest problems was, without trying to be rude to your listeners, accountants as a breed are maybe not that quick to change. I always go through a little model in my head. I call it the BLAC model, BLAC, B for blatant, L for latent, A for aspirational, and C for critical. And when I first started talking to accountants, sort of in that period, 2012, 13, 14, and so on, I think we were in that sort of quadrant where the problem was latent. It wasn't really obvious to most accountants in the US. And the need to change was what I would call aspirational. They were always interested in listening to me, but they weren't necessarily that sort of ready to change. Today, if we fast forward, 10 years, we're in the top of that quadrant, I think, where the problem is, i.e. the need to become more forward-looking, added value, more proactive. That problem is no longer sort of latent, it's blatant. And the need to change has shifted from aspirational to critical. So that sort of shifted over the period. So probably my biggest problem in the early days was identifying accountants who actually recognized the problem and wanted to change. Somewhere along the line, as I say, I met up with Anton Anderson, and he was coming at it actually from a different angle, where he was talking to financial advisors who wanted to work with accountants. And actually, that was a much easier place to start. But probably the biggest sort of shift in the positive sense in that period has been what we're doing now, actually, talking virtually. Because again, US is a big country.
Yes.
And and moving and training and helping people wasn't necessarily that easy back in 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago.
Yep.
Whereas the big movement was, I mean, obviously COVID wasn't a great time for many people. It was a terrible period, but some businesses benefited from COVID, and we were definitely one, because what we're doing now, Zooming, went from being something that most people were uncomfortable with it, to being something which we just took for granted.
Yeah,
and
it was a de facto model now. It's a de facto model now.
Exactly. And that just pushed the business forward at a pace. So, but there's been lots of challenges along the way. The probably, sort of, if we concentrate more on the period where we've been with Elite Resource Team, it was really, I mean, myself and Anton have actually recently written a book on this, by the way. We call it The Art of Collaboration,
Okay.
when two tribes stop the war. And those two tribes are the financial advisors and the accountants. And the reference to the two tribes stop the war, apart from being some reference to 1980s pop music and Frankie Goes to Hollywood, it also references the perspectives, sort of typically, of those two groups, the financial advisor and the accountant. And we've done exercises on this sort of thing, but if you put them both in a room, let's just say you put 30 financial advisors and 30 accountants in a room, and watch what happens, what would probably happen, or what typically would happen, is that the 30 financial advisors would go to that end of the room, and the accountants go to the other, and they'd form their own little groups. It was sort of like watching high school kids going to their first school dance or something. And those perspectives, they're different perspectives, where they almost saw each other as the enemy, was probably one of the early things that we had to work with. And if you look at and I'm obviously massively generalizing here, but the accountants, as just a typical opinion, would regard the advisor as untrustworthy and only out for the money and the deal, not necessarily looking to protect their clients. And sort of by contrast, the financial advisors would regard the accountant as sort of boring and the deal killer. And obviously, in many ways, the whole groups have earned those reputations for each other, but the better accountants and advisors actually recognize that by stopping the war and collaborating together, they can actually serve their client better. We use this phrase, being holistic, so that we're coming together to look at the client's problems sort of in the round, rather than just coming from our traditional perspective. So, probably that sort of ability to understand where each party was coming from, and then how to actually address that, was probably the biggest issue we faced. And that's really why the book is called, The Art of Collaboration, when two tribes stop the war.
Well, you must have spoken to a lot of accountants. You must have spoken to a lot of financial advisors. I'm sure your partner would also come with this perspective of having dealt with so many financial advisors.
Yes.
Why are these two people not talking to each other? Tell me more about that research.
Well, I think it's mainly almost like traditional way of working. So to some extent, it comes from working in their own silos. And so if you look at from the accountant's perspective, which is where I'm probably most familiar, we work in our silo as our accounting firm. We do our thing, whether it's account prep or tax returns. We don't really need to talk to these other professional advisors. And so, we just regard ourselves as doing a really good job. Funnily enough, this whole thing came out to me really early on when I moved to the US. The guy who owned the company that built my house, I was having a house built, and I was talking to him, and I got talking about business strategy and stuff, and I sort of said to him something at the time which I thought was a really normal question. I said, so who helps you with that type of business strategy advice? Is it your accountant? And honestly, he looked at me like I was mad, and he said, absolutely not.
Why would I talk to him?
No, he said, I go to my accountant for my tax, and that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I go to my financial advisor for financial advice, and I go to, various experts for various things. And he said, actually, my biggest problem is that I'm really good at building houses, but I'm not very good at, he used the phrase quarterbacking, which, 12 years ago, I didn't maybe understand that well, but now I do. He said, I'm really good at building houses, but I'm not that good at quarterbacking all these experts. And I need help. And actually, I still work with that particular house builder to be his strategic advisor. But that's the germ of where this whole idea. He was a really successful, still is a really successful business person. But the way it worked, the traditional silo method, really wasn't working for him. And that whole idea of the team-based model, where in particular we find that if the advisor and the accountant work together more as a team, they're not necessarily, in a legal partnership together, but quite often more like a sort of joint venture type relationship. But when they work together for their better clients, suddenly what they can begin to do is look holistic, be proactive, add value, and provide a way better service to their best clients, what I call their A or B clients. And obviously the ones who only want the backward looking service, those are probably the C and the D clients. We're not that interested in those really. What we're looking for is to provide a better service to our best clients. And that's what we learned to do at Latham's, and that's much of what we translate into practice today.
Do you want to earn CPE credit? Take this course of MyCPE 1 to earn free credit. Click the link in the description to get started.
All right. Okay. Well, now that we have explored the origins, let's talk about how the team-based model solves the industry problems. How does this model specifically address the inefficiencies in traditional financial advisory,
Yes.
and CPA relationships?
Yeah. And I suppose there's two sorts of aspects to the answer, I guess, there. I mean, so I suppose it starts with what do we do at Elite? And really we do three things, and I'll then explain how those three things then come together into this thing we call the team-based model. So, the three things that we really do are we provide coaching and communities that allow the, advisors and accountants to learn how to do it better or to learn how to do it differently. So, and I'll come back to that in a second, but there's coaching and communities. One is tools and technology, because without the tools and technology, you're sort of reinventing the wheel, and we provide those tools and technology to make it, turnkey, and you can just do this stuff. And then the third thing we do, and this is probably the most important and forms a very important part of the team-based model, is we widen the ability of the accountant and the advisor to solve client problems by providing access to other experts for other problems that the client may have. We actually call those experts, we call it the virtual family office, but it's basically, it's the coaching and communities, it's the tools and technology, and it's the access to other types of expertise. Those three things are really important. I'll touch quickly on the coaching one. Tools and technology, probably pretty obvious. Experts I'll come on to. Coaching, this is what I call, well, I use a metaphor. I'm full of metaphors, but I refer to becoming a left-handed toothbrusher. I'm right-handed. Obviously, I nowadays have an electric toothbrusher, but in the days when I had a normal, regular toothbrush, I use my right hand because I'm right-handed. It's one of the really few things I could do. Brushing my teeth is one of the really few things that my wife would tell you that I can actually do, two things at the same time. I could brush my teeth and be thinking about something else. It's so instinctive to me. Imagine though, turning from being a right-handed toothbrusher to being a left-handed toothbrusher. That wouldn't feel so natural.
Yep.
And it would probably take a few weeks of getting used to it before you felt really comfortable. And that analogy is really the difference between looking backwards and looking forwards. We're so used to looking backwards and how we work. It's like the right-handed toothbrusher. It's so natural, we default to it. Being proactive and forward-looking and looking forward is sort of like becoming a left-handed toothbrusher, and maybe not everyone needs to help with the change, but lots of accountants do need help to change and to sort of be that coach and that safety net while they're learning how to do it. And that's a lot of what we do. So those three things are really important. But there's a phrase, really, what does the client want? Do they want the really fancy drill, or do they just want a hole in the wall? The answer is they want a hole in the wall.
Yeah.
So whilst those three things I've sort of talked about are sort of like the really fancy drill, ultimately what the client's interested in is service. And it's the team-based model that allows the service to be provided. And the way we do that, we basically, in the beginning, when the accountant and advisor work together, we put them in what we call a proactive planning team.
Okay.
That proactive planning team is where basically the accountant and the advisor are working together. There are a couple of other bodies in that team, but let's not worry about them here. They're the ones, they're local to the client, they're directly talking to the client, and what they're really looking to do is understand the problems of the client. And you see, it's one of the shifts from sort of backward to forward, because when you're preoccupied with looking backward, you know what the client wants. They want a set of accounts, they want a tax return. If you're going to be proactive, you have to actually identify what the client wants or needs. It's their priority. And accountants aren't really used to doing that so much. But basically, we sit in the proactive planning team, and the very first thing we do is a diagnostic, which is understanding sort of what the client needs, or what their priorities are, or what their goals are. And again, we could go into a ton of detail here, but the outcome of that first meeting, which is usually an hour to 90 minutes, is where you've explained to the client what you're doing, because otherwise they'd think you're a bit odd, because you suddenly have all these interesting questions rather than what you normally do. And we've established what they might be interested in, and ultimately what they are interested in. So we've established their priorities. In that proactive planning team, we've got two professionals usually. We've got the accountant and we've got the financial advisor. And of course, if their needs fall into that particular, what I call the swim lanes of the accountant and the advisor, then that's great. It's basically business as usual. Suddenly you've got some extra work that's come out of that, and that's great. I tend to refer to this as sort of like the pizza. Imagine a pizza has got, like, I don't know, 12 slices.
All right.
So the accountant and the advisor might be providing 2, 3, 4 of those 12 slices, but certainly not all 12 usually. So if what the client needs is in that, the main skill set of the accountant and advisor, then that's great. What happens if it's not? And that's where the second team comes in. It's the virtual family office.
Okay.
And that virtual family office is made up of, typically 70 to 100 experts in all sorts of different areas, nothing to do with accounts and financial advice. It could be leadership, it could be business growth, it could be anything.
Right.
And by the way, the accountants decide and tailor which ones they want and which ones they don't. But basically, behind you, if you think of it in football parlance, the accountant and the advisor are like the first team that meet the client first, the proactive planning team. But if the client's needs fall, outside of their regular swim lanes, then the virtual family office is sort of like the special teams, and you can bring in the special teams, and suddenly you've got the ability to solve all the client's problems rather than just those 3 or 4 slices. That means that the accountant, as well as the financial advisor, but say it's the accountant's clients, they've widened their service offering to their clients. They've become central to their clients' needs. The accountant doesn't need to worry about understanding all this stuff. In fact, their role, the one that I talk about, is their job is to just hold their client's hand and make sure that they're comfortable with what's, they know their clients better than anybody else. So they're sort of holding the client's hand, helping them to make the right decisions, but bringing in the right experts. And along the way, the accountants and the advisors also earn, revenue streams from all these other types of work that they would not normally get. So what it results in is a win for all parties. The client gets a much better holistic and proactive service. The accountant and the advisor win either because they've got extra work that they do themselves or because they've identified other people to bring in. And suddenly, particularly the smaller accountants, suddenly, if you look at the typical smaller accountant, their biggest strength is their close personal touch with their client, but their biggest weakness is a lack of resource. And we solve that problem for them, literally at the click of a button. Suddenly, instead of looking like 10 people in their team, the number it is, they suddenly have 100 people in their team, except they're not paying the other 90 unless, they're not paying for them. They just call them in when they're needed. And it's a very effective system. And so the team-based model is the proactive planning team of the accountant and the advisor talking to the client, and then the virtual family office sits behind them as the special teams to supplement their skills if and when and as and when that's needed. That's what the team-based model is.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.
Well, that's fantastic. And there are two things that I wanted to ask you further on this. One was the communication part, because you mentioned about the communication. And when these two professionals are actually at the united front, in front of the client, and the accountant is doing the communication, has it ever been that the financial advisor brings in his client? In that case, would the financial advisor be
the way it normally works, actually? I mean, it can work in all sorts of different scenarios, but you've got, the financial advisor can obviously do this with their own clients. The accountants can do it with their own clients. But where it does work best is where they work together as a team. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure that that's a team that's going to work well together. So we spend a lot of time, that's part of the coaching and the training, is, making sure and not rushing into, but actually making sure that this is a team that's going to work well, that's going to communicate well. You look, I'm personally quite a big believer in DISC profiling, DISC. Why was that? Because we did it at Latham's back in the day. We had all 300 people DISC profiled, and that's where I sort of learned to form teams. But, quite often we talked about, for example, the typical accountant and advisor being at two ends of the dance floor. Well, also, not always the case, but quite typically they have different characteristics. And so by themselves, those characteristics might be seen as weaknesses sometimes, but put them together and they form strengths. And so the accountant is usually really good, for example, at holding the client's hand, looking after them, making sure that the solution is right for them. The advisor by nature might be a little bit more proactive and sort of sales orientated, if you like, but put the two together. And actually that's a nice balance. It's a balance between making sure it's the right thing, but also not doing nothing, sort of thing. And they come together, and obviously not every, plenty of, there are occasions where accountants and advisors come together and then after a few months realize maybe they're not that compatible. But then there's loads of them that have worked really hard at this, and they recognize that talking and, again, the title of the book is The Art of Collaboration, and it's learning to communicate better between themselves as well as the client. And quite often what starts as what you might call loose partnership becomes legal partnerships, because they recognize that they make a lot more money and they have a lot more sort of professional satisfaction because they're doing better and more interesting things with their better clients.
Absolutely. You mentioned that, one of the pillars of the team-based model is technology, and accountants use a different technological ecosystem. They've got a different set of requirements. Financial advisors have got a different technological system. So does the team-based model kind of like bring both?
We don't need to try to, you have to differentiate, I think, and I'm a big one for talking about what I call T-shaped consulting. So you see, T-shaped consulting looks like that. So
Yep.
first bit is the top of the T, and that's where we provide technology in particular, where what we're not doing is diving into a meeting with a client and drilling down. This stuff here is drilling down.
Okay.
So we don't know yet whether this client wants accounting services or financial advice services or any other services. So what we're doing is we're going across the top of the T, and it's what I sort of typically call a mile wide and an inch deep. So you're going a mile wide and
Yep.
an inch. And what you're doing is you're talking, and it doesn't, like I've already referenced, it only takes 60 to 90 minutes. But in that 60 to 90 minutes, what you've done is you've established across all the possibilities of where they may be interested in services, which ones they are. Once you've identified, then you can drill down into that particular area. And instead of being a mile wide and an inch deep, now you're a mile deep and an inch wide. Usually the technology you're referencing is the bottom of the T. We know they want accounting. We use our particular technology to drill down, or whatever it may be.
Yep.
Where we're providing technology is the top of the T.
Nice.
that allows you not to necessarily force the client just down one particular avenue. And so it's that there's really two areas, I guess, of the technology. One is what I've just described. It's the diagnostic tools. It's also, we call it the mapping process, which is to keep track of all these different experts and to match them with experts, all sorts of stuff there. The other side of the technology is looking like a 21st century accountant, for example.
Yeah.
I've already referenced that the virtual family office is good for accountants because it makes them look bigger. It's also good for accountants because it widens their service. I'm not saying this applies to every accountant, but quite a lot. Their website looks like it came from the 20th century. It basically says, come to me, we're great, we're experienced, we're professional, we're accountants, we look backwards. Imagine if you've got a website that says I look backwards, but then starts to talk to a client looking forwards, you do appear a little schizophrenic. And it doesn't really matter with the existing clients, because honestly, the existing clients probably don't even look at the website.
Yeah.
But it really matters with new clients, because I can promise you, no new client comes to you without looking at your website first. You would look at anyone's website before you went to see them, of course, or any new client will. So it's a bit odd if you have an outward facing appearance of being backward looking and, sort of old fashioned, but you don't present as you wish to present as a forward looking one. And so the things we tend to then help the tech accountant in particular with are things like, website, we call them plugins or templates, and you can either have a full makeover or you can even plug into your existing website. Suddenly you can see these 90 experts, or you can see some of these processes. So the idea behind that is you actually look like a forward-looking, value-adding, proactive type of accountant. And so that type of technology sooner or later, it's usually not the first place we start, but it's sooner or later comes up, because on the whole, the accountant is too busy
Yes.
to want to do that for themselves, and we just make it really easy for them.
So looking ahead, what is your vision of the future of the team-based model?
I think I would say it's probably to a degree more of the same. It's, if you go back, there was a question before about challenges and so on. So you've got the key things for these people coming on board are, let's not try and reinvent. We've created a wheel. We call it the team-based model. Let's not try too hard to reinvent that again and again and again. Let's make sure we do follow the process. Let's make sure we, what I call, measure success. And if you do all of those things, that team-based model is is going to work. It does work. In terms of looking ahead, I think that the biggest thing at the moment is, again, I go back to that black model I talked about before. If we went back a few years, the biggest challenge was probably either getting the accountant, I'm referencing the accountant mainly here, but getting the accountant to recognize the need to change.
Yep.
And if I talk to, let's just say I talked to 100 accountants, say 8 years ago, I don't know, maybe 20 of them recognize the need to change.
Yep.
I talk to 100 accountants today, it isn't, I would say almost nobody doesn't recognize the need to change. The main thing there is, do I want to change? So they recognize the need, but do they want to? And you then get into, I suppose, age groups and things. If the accountant is getting on, sort of in the last few years before retirement, they may recognize that as an industry they need to change, but they probably don't want to, and they probably won't. And obviously, as you go backwards from that point, it's the recognizing the need and the want becomes much more apparent. If you go to any accountant under 50, not only do they recognize the need, but they want. And I think this change of mindset is probably the biggest thing that's sort of happening at the moment. And so more and more and more, we're seeing younger accountants who don't want to follow in that traditional model, who do want to look really, really different and absolutely embrace this sort of different way of looking at things. They don't want to be stuck in silos. So I think, to me, the biggest thing that's changing is not so much our model. I think we were probably ahead of the curve. You referenced, looking into the future. I feel like, I used to say when I first came to the US, I've sort of got three benefits to accountants. One, I am one, so I understand and empathize with accountant needs. Two, I've owned a lot of businesses, so I think I empathize with the needs of your best clients. But three, I'm a time traveler because I've been here before and I've seen it and done it. So I think if anything, what's happened at Elite is that we've been way ahead of the curve. The curve has sort of caught up with us, and that mindset shift is very much to the fore. A certain type of age group, a certain type of mindset, and really it's just a case of doing it before the train leaves the station, because actually if you were to wait much longer, I'm not saying it's going to be next week, but 2, 3, 4, 5 years, the train will have well left the station. You won't look different. In fact, you'll have been left way behind. So that's probably, I think we're in that period of the time is now, the train is leaving the station, the model is there, follow the model, and it will be good.
Yes, and I guess somebody coined a term called client advisory services. It's been doing rounds of late. If you were to talk to somebody about client advisory services, you were to tell them, they would probably understand what that is.
Yes.
But probably 7 to 8 years back when you started this, I guess this term was not coined. So, I guess, like you rightly said, I think you're ahead of the curve and people are now just catching on, and
Yes.
rightly said. But, when you're doing this, you mentioned that, some of these partnerships, these partnerships have transformed into legal partnerships because, they have seen this, that, they can, there's a higher professional satisfaction there. But oftentimes it's businesses that are joining together. So when firms prepare for these mergers, how do they anticipate for those changes and trends that are coming? How do the firms, like, both the businesses are different, both their employees are different, and now we have this merging there.
Well, actually, you see, I probably should be a little more specific there. What they tend not to do is merge their whole businesses. See, I'll give you an example.
Yes.
So from the let's do it from the accountant's point of view. I always say that accountants have two businesses under one roof.
Okay.
And you've got the backward looking stuff, which is the compliance, and you've got the forward looking stuff, which is the advice and advisory and planning. They are radically different businesses, like so different. And in fact, this was very much the Latham's experience, 20 odd years ago. So for example, we had, just keeping it really simple, we had two tax businesses. We had tax past and we had tax future. We did not merge them. Why is that? Well, because the way you make money in both is entirely different.
Okay.
If you're focused in tax, let's just say tax past, the only way you make more money is to be efficient, because you cannot add value to the past. I'm sorry, you may wish to think you can, but you cannot add value to the past. It has happened.
Yep.
So the only way you run that tax compliance business, you have to be really efficient. Get the job in, work on the job, get it right first time, do it right, do it to the required quality, get it out of the door, send your bill and get paid. The focus is efficiency.
Yes.
Now look at the future tax future business. Your focus is not efficiency. In fact, let's just say, I'll make up an example. I can save you $1 million in tax. It does not matter whether I take a day, a week, or a month to save you $1 million. That's very valuable to you, and you'll pay for that valuable service. So you've got this two mindsets there. In compliance, the mindset should be efficiency, and in advisory or planning, the mindset should be value. If you try to do both at the same time, you end up with what I call Monday to Friday syndrome. On Monday, I'm going to be efficient. On Tuesday, I'm going to add value. On Wednesday, I'm going to be efficient, and so on. And by Friday, well, actually, you're either very mixed up and not doing either very well, or more likely, you've defaulted to your traditional position of just being a compliance factory. So imagine, therefore, you've got these two businesses, and imagine you've recognized that. And it's not just tax, it's the whole thing. But basically, the accountant's traditional business is almost like a standalone business then. And by the way, when we did this at Latham's, not only did we make a lot more money in the forward-looking business, we made a lot more money in the backward-looking business as well, because suddenly we focused on what mattered. But basically, so then when you go back to your question, the accountant is not merging with the financial advisor on the backward-looking compliance business. That belongs to the accountant. In the same way, the advisor is probably not merging their existing business, but what they are coming together on is that what I call the proactive planning team, which is the forward-looking business, which by and large doesn't exist at the moment. So it's almost like a referral from your own business to that forward-looking business, and that's where accountants and advisors form proper legal partnerships. You're not selling some of your accounting business to the advisor. That would be bonkers. But what you are doing is you're joining forces on the forward-looking part of the business, and that's really easy to separate, and that's where they truly can come together to add value.
Wow, very beautifully put. Very beautifully put. Now there's this one thought that's coming to my mind. When you come across this partnership, you've decided to adopt the team-based model. But if you could just enlighten our listeners in your own words, what are some common pitfalls to avoid during the implementation process of this?
Well, I think the main pitfalls, I think I may have referenced them earlier, but they try to reinvent the wheel. They don't follow the process. They sort of go off-piste, if you like, in skiing terms. Whereas what we've done is we've mapped a process. We teach a process. We've provided templates and presentations and all sorts of things, scripts and so on, that are designed to work. And so I would say the most common pitfall is sort of just not following the process. And the most common route to success is the people that do follow the process.
Interesting. Well, as we're approaching towards the end, before we end this up, it's clear that the team-based model has the potential to revolutionize how CPAs and financial advisors are working together. Yes. But before we close, I would love to know your final thoughts that you would like to share to our listeners about the future of this alliance, this partnership?
Yeah, well, see, I'm a big, and this is not specific to what we're talking about here. It's something I've done for the whole of my life, which is follow a model, which is saying there are 3 ingredients of business success, which are vision, plan, and desire. Think of it like a journey. You know, if you didn't know where you would, well, step 1 in any journey, you decide where you're trying to get to. That's vision. Then once you decided where you're going to go, you form a plan to get there. And then the third element is, well, do we actually get there? Do we make it at the end of the day? And in business, it's the same. You need to start with a vision. You need to know what you want your business to look like. Most businesses of any sort, and indeed accountants and advisors, if they don't have a clear vision, in this case to become a forward-looking business, they'll just do what most business owners do, which is go round and round in circles. Once you know what you want your business to look like, forward-looking, once you recognize that, you start measuring that by separating your forward-looking income from your backward-looking income and so on, you begin to build a business, you begin to build a plan, and then you can actually sustain the desire to make it happen. But the biggest single failing of most accountants, but most business owners in general, is they don't have a clear business vision. They don't have a clear picture of what they want their business to look like. And that's certainly something which, to me, is a necessary first step. But if they do have that vision that says, actually, I don't want to be this backward-looking accountant. I want to be a forward-looking one. I want to work in collaboration. I want to give my clients better service. I want to add value. I want to be proactive. I want to be holistic. I want to widen my service. If you have that vision, we can help you.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, thank you, Paul, for sharing your insights and experience with us today. To our listeners, stay tuned for more episodes for We're Trying to Figure Out with Saul. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible with everything that you do. Cheers.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.